I'd like to start off by thanking the Muslim Council of Britain very much for inviting me to come along and speak at this important event. In terms of what I can say to you about the new Prevent strategy, first of all, it was it's very kind of my host to introduce me as an expert, but I really claim no expertise in this. I mean, I have some experience as a practitioner, as a former police officer. I have some experience in training police officers, and I have some experience as a researcher. But I certainly wouldn't describe myself as an expert. But when I look at the new Prevent strategy, and I think about what are the key issues here? What are the things that we really need to focus in on? I think for me there are sort of three key things. The first I would describe as credibility. The credibility of this as a counter-terrorism strategy. The second is believability. Can we believe in it as a government strategy document? And the third thing is what I would describe as responsibility, political responsibility, which I'll come to in a moment. In terms of credibility, as has been mentioned, the original Prevent strategy, the original contest or contest 1, then it evolved into contest 2. I think probably we're all fairly familiar with the thrust of that. And with the general election in 2010 approaching, I'd hoped that if there was going to be a change of government, there was a real opportunity to start afresh with this and make a clean break with the mistakes of the past, learn the lessons from it, and begin afresh in a more constructive way. And I had a sort of brief opportunity to speak to Chris Grayling, who at that time was Shadow Home Secretary, and with Michael Gove, who was my own MP, who's now Education Secretary, and sort of say to them, there is an opportunity here for a new government to make a very positive reconnection with Muslim society in Britain and begin afresh. And I didn't get particularly encouraging signals back from them, I have to say. This was before they entered government. And it appeared to me that they'd already made up their minds about a number of fairly key issues. And sure enough, when we see this new Prevent, whatever version we're on now, Prevent Mark 1 from this particular administration, it's not a clean start. It's not a fresh beginning. It's the remains of the last Prevent strategy reheated. It's been cut around a bit. It's been tinkered around with, but basically the fundamentals remain the same for me, and I think that's disappointing. I think that if government, the Home Office, it's principally the Home Office is responsible for this, is going to draw up a security-based strategy, then that strategy needs to be something that is really quite narrow, something really quite tightly focused, and intelligence-driven, and aimed specifically at that tiny minority of individuals in our society who threaten the lives and well-being of the rest of us through their intention to commit terrorist acts. That would, for me, that would be a useful and workable security-based counter-terrorism strategy. But that isn't what we've got, and that isn't what Prevent is. It's quite the opposite of that. It's a very wide-ranging strategy. it has a very broad sweep. And at the heart of it is not so much a security agenda, it's more about a political and ideological agenda. That is what seems to inform it. And as with the original Prevent strategy, you know, it's based around this very nebulous set of values, value statements, variously described as, you know, our values, our shared values, universal values, British values, and we're told that this is about universal human rights, a respect for universal human rights, equality before the law, democracy, and full participation in our society, and support for these core values. And this brings me back to the credibility issue. You know, we could, as citizens, we could look at this, you know, bearing in mind this has been produced by Parliament, you know, on our behalf, in our names. And we could look at that and say, we could quite comfortably, you know, we could sign up to that. We'd feel quite comfortable with that. But is that a credible basis for this as a counter-terrorism strategy? You know, when we look at the actions of our previous government and now the actions of our current government, and we look at the importance of democracy, you know, how important was democracy in Libya before the Libyan people rose up against the tyrant who was oppressing them? You know, how important was democracy in Pakistan when a general deposes the elected head of government and seizes power for himself? You know, if we believe in democracy and we believe in the rule of law, then it would be reasonable to think that a British government would break off diplomatic relations, perhaps impose some sort of economic sanction, but that isn't what happened. You know, this individual is welcomed as an important ally in the war against terror. So where does that leave our commitment to these important values that we are supposedly promoting? So there's a gap in the credibility of the political underpinning of this as a strategy. And then we look at, you know, the believability issue. You know, again, as citizens, can we believe in this? Can we have confidence in what the thrust of this as a strategy is? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And I should just briefly conclude the points that I would like to make, because there are other speakers waiting to make their contribution. So briefly, I talked about the evolution of this current prevent strategy, and I talked about, you know, the fundamentals of it. Is it credible? Is it a credible strategy? And then I wanted to pick up this issue about believability. You know, when we read it and we delve into the detail of this strategy, can we look at it and understand it and conceive of it as a believable narrative for government action, for implementation? And when I look at the strategy, and I see things like, there's one particular section on page 27, it says, we judge that communities who do not participate in all civic society are more likely to be vulnerable to radicalisation by all kinds of terrorist groups. And you think about that, you know, in a round, that's quite a bold assertion. So you think about, you know, where, as we look around our society, you know, who are these communities? You know, perhaps fairly close communities. And, you know, we might look at communities that have, you know, decades of tradition, centuries of tradition in this country, monasteries, you know, Benedictine monks, nuns, who live in closed communities, who do not participate in all of civic society, who devote their lives to prayer and contemplation. And we think to ourselves, are they now vulnerable to radicalisation and becoming terrorists? And it doesn't seem particularly plausible to me. We may look closer to hand at the gypsy and traveller community at Dale Farm that's been in the news recently. A community that is accused of all sorts of terrible things on a daily basis. Essentially a fairly closed community. But I've never heard them accused of radicalisation or terrorism. So when we read these sort of statements and we start to unpack them and realise that immediately, you know, this thesis starts to unravel, we might ask ourselves, can we actually believe in this as a government strategy? And then I look at, you know, who are the experts who have informed the strategy? You know, where are the reference points? And I find 2, 3, 4 different publications referred to that originate in the Netherlands. And, you know, we look at the Netherlands, it's a different country with a different language and a different history and a different culture and a different society. And I think to myself, you know, we're not going to learn about Britain in the Netherlands. So why has this been used to inform a UK strategy? And then further on, I remember the Palestinian-born academic Edward Said warned Western policymakers more than 30 years ago about the dangers of relying upon right-wing American think tanks to advise us on developing policy aimed at Muslim society and Muslim countries. And he mentioned particularly organisations like the RAND Corporation. Good advice in my view. So it's interesting to find at the bottom of page 56 of the new strategy who gets mentioned but the RAND Corporation. Experts in de-radicalisation apparently. So I question, you know, how believable is this as a narrative, as a strategy document? And finally, I just want to finish this point about responsibility, about the political responsibility. You know, we see all around us on a daily basis this widespread Islamophobic discourse in the popular press, in the media, particularly in some of our tabloid newspapers. It goes largely unchallenged. So when I read in a government document the use of Arabic words, jihadi, Salafi, takfiri, bandied around in a thoroughly careless and ill-considered way, and then we're surprised when these things are picked up and, you know, they're recycled in the Daily Express and elsewhere, you know, under stories entitled, "Look at what the Muslims are doing now." I think it is politically irresponsible, and I'm disappointed that our government has shown this irresponsibility and lack of insight to the consequences of such careless use of language that clearly our own policymakers do not understand. So just some brief points that I wanted to make. I'm going to stop there because I'm very conscious of the important contribution that the other guests have got to make.